Good evening. Oh no, good evening. Good evening. I was like, wait, I am in a room full of people, right? So one more time, good evening. Good evening. I am so honored to be here and so excited to be in your midst. You are my first love. And when I talk about my first love, I talk about young people between the ages of 18 and 30 who are just living life, who are going amongst their daily routines, who are in some respects learning and loving and becoming. And so whenever I get to engage you, I am just ecstatic. And as someone who loves love and loves to be in love, I am on cloud nine tonight. So I'm so excited to be here. As Thais was reading my bio, I was thinking to myself, this sounds so obnoxious. You know, it's one of those things where you work hard and people tell you about titles and biographies and people ask you to submit them. And then I hear it and I'm like, oh, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Rozella. I love falling in love. I love to be in love. And I love to eat and drink and engage with friends and family and have a good time. That's all you really need to know about me. So I'm really excited to be here and to engage in some conversations with you around purpose and meaning and call and how it is you come to create a life that's meaningful and the life that you want, not that others want for you, but a life that you want. And the best thing is you're in the time and stage in your life to be able to do that, right? You are in the time to ask some questions. You're in a place where actually you could change your mind at any given moment. Now, it may not feel like that, right? You have responsibilities and there are always choices to be made, but you could actually change your mind at any given moment. And so when I work with young adults particularly, I like to start with that because I want you to know that nothing you do, nothing you've done has to be the end-all be-all of your story. You have the right to change your mind. And that God has created each of us as people who are creative, and people who are problem solvers, and people who can show up in the world with our full self. And so at any time you tap into that, it might look different than what you initially thought. But that's okay, because you can change your mind. So my story is a bit about me changing my mind, and also a bit about me coming to terms with the fact that the life that I had planned for myself was not the life that was unfolding. Do I have any fellow control freaks here? Am I the only one? Okay, raise your hand. That's a part of who we are, right? Or people who struggle with being flexible when plans change. Am I the only one that's in that space? There's something, all right? I would love for you to do some inner soul searching, right? That like knowing laughter. Yeah, I think that's me. And that's who I was, right? I was someone who was very clear about what I wanted and where I was going and the way that I was going to get there. And life happened, and actually nothing turned out initially the way that I had planned. But as I stand before you today, I can tell you that everything that I've experienced and everything that I've done and every opportunity that I've had has actually been more than I could have imagined. So much more than I could have imagined. And I am so grateful for the ways that in my experience the Spirit has moved and helped me to recognize not only my own gifts, but needs and issues in the world, and created pathways for me to engage that. So I'm going to invite you to do something really quickly, because I don't like to be the only one doing the work. I want you to write your 6-word story. You get 6 words to craft your story. Either how you identify currently, where you hope to go, who you hope to be, but you have 6 words. And you can do it on your phone, you can do it writing down, but I'm actually going to invite you to craft a 6-word story. I don't want you to overthink it. I know that I'm in a room full of overachievers because I'm at Valpo. Don't overthink it. There are no wrong answers. You can always change your mind and change it later. But I'd like for you to craft your 6-word story. So what would you say about who you are, or about what you do, or about how you hope to show up in the world, any one of those, in 6 words? And I'm going to just give you a couple of minutes. You get 6 words and a couple of minutes. And it does not have to be a proper sentence. six-word story. You get one more minute. Now, of course, I'm going to ask for some volunteers to share their story, and I will share mine as well. See, if you volunteer someone else, then I'm going to ask you to go.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, you.
Okay.
Well, can you stand up and say your name? That'd be great. I know. I'm sorry.
I know. Okay. I'm Micah, and my 6th word is like be conscientious, diamond in the rough.
Ooh, be conscientious, diamond in the rough. Lovely. Thank you. Yes.
I'm Kaylin. I am God's lovely and perfect child.
Yes, I am God's lovably imperfect child. What are some other 6-word stories? We'll just do one more from this side. Oh, yes, ma'am.
My name is Angelise, and my 6-word story is I will be who I am.
I will be who I am. Very philosophical. My invitation for you is to reflect on your 6-word story. Now here's the thing, your 6-word story might change every year. I mean, for those of us that are like me who like new things all the time, it might change every week. But the idea is that you start to think about who you are and what matters and use that as an anchoring place. So I have 2 6-word stories. The first one is desperately seeking justice, mercy, humility, and love. And that story came to be as I was figuring out who I was in the midst of the life that I had planned falling apart. So I had gone to school to a small, historically black college and university called Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, an all-female school. My freshman year, I had done early admission. So I was admitted in December of 1998. I knew where I was going. I was ready. I had gotten some scholarships, and I was so excited because I came from a very strict household, so I was about to just let it all hang out. I was ready. And I got to Spelman, and I loved it. Like, I am someone who loves to have fun, so I had as much fun as I worked hard. Actually, I didn't work as hard as I did to get into Spelman, but you know, it was freshman year. It was all good. I came home with B's. That was fine. But had a really good time. And then I left Spelman, came home to work for a summer, and my maternal grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. And then everything shifted. I ended up having to stay home and go to the community college because my parents couldn't afford for me to go back to Spelman. My grandmother needed care, and she was at that point going to MD Anderson Cancer Center, so I was a part of her team that took her to get care 3 times a week. And I was now in this place that I said I would never be. I was also a bit of a snob, and I mentioned that to the group yesterday. I was like, I would never go to community college. And there I was. So lesson number 1, never say never. And while I was there, I was really struggling, again, with this plan that I had created. And I got mad. Like, I kind of got indignant. Like, I did everything right. I graduated top of my class. I was not only a cheerleader, but also in the National Honor Society. Take that. Like, I was active in my church. I was the chairwoman of the Mayor's Youth Council for Missouri City, Texas. I was civically engaged. I was socially engaged. I was spiritually engaged. And I got all A's on top of it. So I deserved, right, what was coming next, which was this amazing time at this school that I had dreamed of. And that didn't happen. So I spent my sophomore year upset. Like, I still made all A's and I was a tutor because I was going to serve, of course. But I spent my sophomore year tutoring, helping with my grandmother, working. And then junior year rolled around and I went to transfer to Texas A&M University because I needed to go to a 4-year institution. And getting back to Spelman would have been really difficult at that point. And that was the year that I experienced my first major depressive episode. So it was a year of me not going to class. It was a year of me partaking in lots of liquor. It was a year of me smoking, so I did not have to remember what was happening. And it was a year of me just not feeling. And over the course of that year, I mentioned to the group yesterday that that was when September 11th happened. So in our country, there was a lot happening. I had a cousin that committed suicide that year. And one thing after another compounded until this sparkling person that I was just drifted away. And so here I was at the end of my junior year in college. Now all of my friends have gone on to internships and are clear about their majors. We did not have double and triple and quadruple majors and minors like many of you have. Like I heard that yesterday and y'all made me tired. I'm like, I don't know how you get all of that in. And hopefully you can use all of that as you leave here. But everyone was choosing their major and minors. Everyone was interning, doing great things. And here I was, ashamed and depressed and not willing to leave my house because I had just gotten a letter that said, you are no longer welcome here at Texas A&M University. Because in order to stay here, you have to have at least a 1.5 GPA, and you're at 0.75. Right? So I left school that year and went back to work at a camp that I had worked at and entered into a time of discernment, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have a choice. And that's lesson number 2. It's interesting what we can learn when we actually don't have a choice and when we're in the midst of trauma or tragedy and suffering, but we pay attention. And we listen to the voices and the people around us who love and care for us and take part in opportunities, even when we don't think that they are the right ones for us. So I was working with kids and people were telling me, you should go work with kids. And I was like, I don't like kids. And they're like, you've always worked with kids. And I was like, I don't know what else I'm doing, so let's give that a try. And that became the year that I fell into ministry. And that was in the fall of 2002, and I have not stopped since. So I feel like, as I think about my pathway to purpose, there are a couple of things that, again, I lift up. Never say never. 2, we hit rock bottom, and we can actually learn a lot because there's really nowhere else to go at that point. And then 3, be open to the way that God is going to use you and refine you and connect you to opportunities and people. So I never wanted to work in ministry, and I said this before, that I didn't want to work in ministry because I wanted to make money. I had nice taste, I like to travel, I like things. And working in ministry would not afford me that. But at that point in my life, I also had a different set of values. I wanted things, I wanted to accumulate wealth, I wanted to make sure that I was able to live a type of lifestyle that I was accustomed to. And the first thing that happened in this kind of next chapter was a humbling of sorts. Of God showing me the ways that God had provided for me and had been present for me in ways that looked different than I thought, but that in ways that were sustaining, in ways that changed who I was. And so I was able to engage in work that was meaningful for probably the first time in my life, working in a congregation, and then I was able to go back to school. And I finished at Texas Southern University with my undergraduate degree in sociology and a minor in African history. And I loved it. And at that point, people were saying, well, what are you going to do with a degree in sociology? Like, are you going on to get your PhD? Or are you going to teach it? And I was like, I don't know, but I know how to think. Like, I'm really good at thinking, and I'm really good at group dynamics and engaging folks. And my mom was like, yeah, thinking doesn't pay the bills, so what are you going to do? And at that point, I was discerning seminary, and she was like, well, that's great, but that still is not something that's going to pay the bills. Like, what does that mean and look like? And I said, well, I don't know, but I know that God has been faithful, and I know that God has kept me through this time, and I know that one of the ways that I've learned to respond is to say yes when an opportunity comes my way, right? And to say yes when I get to a place where doors are opening. So I said yes to seminary and to more school and loved it, but still did not feel like I had the perfect answer. And at this point, I'm mid-20s, I'm married, I'm doing the things on the list because I not only wanted to catch up, I wanted to surpass everyone, right? So I had to graduate with honors, so I did that. And then I needed to get to grad school before my friends got there because I was making up for lost time, so I did that. And then I graduated from seminary with honors by vote of the faculty, so check, right? Like I was constantly checking off things off of my list, even though there were parts of myself that had changed. Those core things were still important. And so finished seminary and then was invited to consider PhD work. And of course, I'm like, yes, Dr. White, right? Like, I'm black and I'm Dr. White. I'm like really excited for that opportunity, and that's still on the list. But in this particular time, I started that process, and then life happened again. My marriage fell apart. Throughout that time, that whole time I struggled with depression, had not been on medication. Finally went on medication. Ended up taking a year off, kind of from life, just to get my health back together. And at that point, I had another breakthrough. It's interesting how everything doesn't just happen at the first breakthrough. Like, it keeps happening throughout life, and you keep learning lessons. And in that moment, the question that God kept asking me, or that kept coming up, was, what are you working so hard for? Who do you really want to be? And is the life that you're currently creating reflective of that answer? And in that moment, I recognized that what I was working so hard for was to still excel at a plan that I had created, or that was created for me years ago, and I actually didn't know who I was. I had married because that's what I thought I was supposed to do, and apparently, this is being recorded. So I had married, and that was not necessarily something that was the best decision in that moment. And I had tried to do things that would then make me appear to be a certain way, to have it all together. And then the reality was that I didn't actually know who I was. And so I took the time in that particular moment to figure out who I was and what mattered most. And then doors opened again, opportunities came again, and it was almost as if God was saying, there's opportunities for you in a variety of different paths, but you actually have to be willing and open to experiencing that and to being present so that when it comes to you, you're able to receive it. I'm someone who is very stubborn and want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. That's also why I work for myself now, because that is something that is a part of who I am. And at every turn in my life, God was saying, okay, there's stuff for you to do, but you can only do it if you let go and if you trust. And letting go and trusting are very difficult for someone who is a control freak. And so I did that in that particular moment, and opportunities again opened in terms of me being a chaplain, and then opportunities to work with my denomination. And that was amazing. I was called to work in Chicago, and I became a church bureaucrat, which I never thought I would be. But I was tasked with the job of working with young adults in a national program, right? And not only working with young adults in a national program, getting paid a salary, getting benefits, getting continuing education, traveling not only over the country, all over the country, but all over the world. I had a condo on Lake Michigan in Chicago. Like, things were going amazingly well. And then something happened. People who looked like me kept getting shot and killed. My church kept struggling with conversations around race. We as a denomination were not clear about where we stood on such issues because we didn't want to be divisive. And I found myself in a place and in a space where everything that I had worked for and thought that I had wanted and felt like aligned with who God had created me to be was not actually sitting well in my soul and in my spirit. And I did what I tend to do. I wrote about it. And so I wrote a piece almost 2 years ago entitled, "The Truth Shall Set You Free." So shall set you free. And I talked about the fact that after we found out that Dylan Roof had killed 9 folks at Mother Emanuel AME Church, one of the things that we learned, and the staff learned before the public learned, was that Dylan Roof was Lutheran of the ELCA persuasion, not necessarily active at his congregation, but was a member of that congregation. And a few of those who actually worked for at Mother Emanuel were students of the Lutheran Seminary in Charleston, South Carolina, or Columbia, South Carolina. And so in that moment, we had the proverbial chickens coming home to roost. You had someone who was from this denomination that actually took it upon themselves to kill folks that were friends of, trained in, uplifted by the denomination. And there was something in me that just couldn't sit still. And so I started writing and speaking and asking questions about the racism that's implicit in our denomination and in our institution. And what does this mean? And how are we going to combat this? And how are we going to provide resources and engage in ways that actually make a difference? And institutions don't like questions, particularly questions that get at either the status quo or the bottom line. And so for 6 months, I was considered very much a problem child. And the problem, on the one hand, was that I was a pretty public figure, so the institution couldn't say or do too much. But on the other hand, the institution was really struggling with how to address some of these issues. And I ended up entering into another discernment process of where am I called to actually do the things that God has created and gifted me to do. So at one point, it was believed that as you ascend through the church, the place that you're called to be is in our national office. And then the recognition became that is actually not the situation, the place where God wanted me to be situated. And how did I know that God didn't want me to be situated there? Because I literally felt myself divided. I say that I was a walking cognitive dissonance, that there was not wholeness or integration in myself, that I was funneling young adults into a system that didn't always care for them in the best way, or that I was representing a system as a black woman that actually was tokenizing people of color. And I had to actually deal with a lot of my own emotions around that and recognize at some point that the institution that I loved dearly couldn't be anything or anyone other than who it was. And so I had to make a choice. Where was I supposed to be as it relates to the work that I was called to do? And for me, that looked like going home and connecting and to being present in my beloved Houston and to working with young adults and also to starting my own endeavor. So there are a couple of questions that I ask as I think about the work that I engage in. So I am a life and leadership coach, and as I mentioned before, I am desperately seeking justice, mercy, humility, and love. That's a play on Micah 6:8. And because I am a lover in every sense of the word, love is a part of my mission statement. But the other mission statement emerged a few years ago, and it became the distillation of the work that I get to do with folks. So very simply, it became helping you live a meaningful life. My goal is to help people live a meaningful life. And the recognition that so many of us don't even know what matters most and what's meaningful because we've been on this hamster wheel of achievement, of success, of checking the boxes off, of doing things right. If I hear one more young adult, and I'm sorry if anyone in here is like this, but if I hear one more person talk about the fact that they're worried about being alone for the rest of their lives at 23 because all of their friends are getting married, I think I might throw up a little bit. This is one of those things that I hear all the time, and I happen to work with all young adult women too in Houston, so I hear this all the time. And I always ask the question, I said, well, is marriage like your goal? Is that your singular goal in life? I mean, if it is, that's fine, then we need to be getting you on a track to get there. But if it's not, like, where does that expectation come from? What is it that you are jonesing for? And have you not yet had the experience that sometimes the things that you want are not actually the things that you need in a given time? Or sometimes the things that you think you want are actually not the things that are best for you. So how do you actually take a moment to reflect on who it is you are, what it is you want, what it is that matters, and be selfish in this season? And when I say selfish, I don't mean that you are inherently not other-focused. What I mean is that you are self-centered, that you're listening to the voice within, that you're paying attention to the opportunities that you have, and that you're reflecting on the meaning that they hold, so that then you can come alive and come to terms with what matters most to you. And so in my work of helping people live a meaningful life, I always ask questions. And so one of the questions that I often start with is, how do you discover who you are? Because I get asked that a lot. Well, how did you come to know? Right? And I sometimes give my story, as I shared with you all, but also I give tidbits of that. You discover by the way that things repeat themselves, lessons that keep coming up. You start paying attention to that. You discover by spending time reflecting on what you're doing and the communities that you're a part of. You discover by uncovering the things that you're passionate about, right? So what are some things that you are passionate about? Things that matter to you? And that's a question I'm asking in real time. And you can just shout it out or say it out. What are things that matter to you, that you are passionate about?
Bees.
Bees?
Yeah.
Are you a beekeeper or are you a?
No, I just love bees.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I mean, yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, all right. Bees, yes.
Video games.
Video games. What else are you passionate about? Yes.
Good grades,
Good grades. Why are you passionate about good grades?
so that way I can graduate college and become a smarter student.
Okay. All right. What else are you passionate about?
Poetry.
Oh.
Literature.
Poetry, literature,
Health.
health. There's a hand over here. Yeah.
Friendship.
Friendship.
Just a
Friendship. Yeah. Okay.
Education.
Education. Yes.
Music.
Music.
Sustainable agriculture.
Sustainable agriculture.
horses.
Horses. So I feel like the first step in discovering who you are is to discover what you're passionate about. And passions can range, right? They can range from things that are seemingly surfacey to things that go deeper. I have a friend and colleague whose son is absolutely passionate about video games. And he used to ask his son questions all the time. What are you going to do with that? You know, how is this going to actually make a difference? And lo and behold, his son, I'm going to get it all wrong. Like, I don't know all of the world of that. But he ended up, he's a gamer, and he ended up being someone who was a tester for the new, this was like a few years ago, when Xbox was coming out with a new game and got like an all-expense-paid trip to Paris to participate in that, and then became someone who now consults as it relates to gaming. And at one point his dad looked at me and was like, well, I guess we're the ones that, you know, the joke's on us. Like, his son is traveling all over the world doing something he loves, providing a service as it relates to both testing and giving feedback for video games, and we were like, what is he doing with this? So I say that to say that, like, there are things that can seemingly seem surface, and there are things that seemingly seem deeper, but the question becomes, how is what you're engaging and what you discover about yourself pointing you towards living a meaningful life? How do you actually reflect on who it is you are? And slightly different from that is the question of what matters most. So I often use this question as I talk about the things that we value. So you can tell what you value based on how you spend your time and your resources, right? So your time and your financial resources, your personal resources, you can tell what you value. So think for a moment about how you spend most of your resources and your time. What would you then say you value based on how you spend your time? And that might not be a fair question because I'm thinking some of you all spend a lot of time reading or studying. Yes? Empowering other people. That's something that you value. Very good. What else do you value?
Latte conversations.
Latte conversations. So both the latte and the conversation together, right? Were you going to say something? Creating space for those who don't have space. Yes? Helping others. So you do a survey of your life as you're discovering who you are to figure out what matters most. And you do that by seeing where you spend your time and your resources. Now here's the thing. Maybe what you're spending your time and your resources on does not actually mirror what it is you actually value. So the question becomes, how do you get those things in alignment? The first step is becoming aware of the misalignment and then doing the work needed to put things in alignment. The third question becomes a question of engagement. So why do you engage in the spaces that you engage in? Once you've kind of uncovered who you are and what matters most at this point in time, why do you engage? So if you're someone who likes to create space, right, for folks that might not have space, then it becomes a question of, well, why is that important to you? Why do you do that? So I'm someone who believes that if people actually tap into their most authentic self, if they spend time in authentic and vulnerable relationships, we can really change the world. I mean, that's my thesis. Period. End of story. I can run for president. But when you do those things, when you talk about why it is you engage, you become clear about what your motivations are and why this matters most. And then lastly, it becomes a question of where do you engage? So for so much of my life in ministry, the kind of conventional wisdom was that if you were in ministry, you work for the church or you work within a church partner institution, because that's what you do when you're interested in ministry. And I recognized that based on everything that I had kind of surveyed, that that place was not the place for me to use the gifts that I have. On the one hand, I am someone who is a 7 on the Enneagram. I don't know if you all or if anyone's familiar with the Enneagram, but I love like flexibility and I love new ideas. I have a new idea every second. I love trying new things. I don't like following rules. And so like there are certain things that are fundamentally about who I am that does not align with working in a particular type of institution. The other thing I came to realize is that I felt most connected to my call the closer to the ground that I was. So the more one-on-one relationships I had, the more I was able to work with actual young adults and to coach young adults was very important to me as I thought about where I should be located. And then the other thing that comes up, which I think in almost any industry might be something that people have to think about, is if you are doing program administration or direct service. If you're doing research, or if you're doing more of the, what would be the opposite of research? You have people that research and then you have people that what?
Implement the research.
Implement the research, or, yeah, sure, implementers of research. We went to seminary, yeah, we did. Sorry. But you have like different strands within almost every career, right? So even if you were thinking about sociology, you could be a sociologist that was very much into data and statistics, right? Or you could be someone that either taught, that was a teacher of that, so you have a researcher or a teacher. Maybe those are the two options. So part of it is figuring out where in that spectrum you fall. I'm someone who is much more interested in direct service than I am in program administration. And that's not a judgment. That's just a clarity that I've come to based on my gifts and my own passions. And so my hope for each of you all is that as you come to explore who you are and what your gifts are and how those gifts are coming together to work, that you also recognize that there is no decision that's final, that in moments of struggle and in moments of times that we don't know which side is up, that there are often opportunities to learn something about ourselves, that even as plans change, we can learn from each part of our story. There is no part of your story that is unworthy. There is no part of your story that you just get to throw away, right? There is something there, even in the shit that happens. There is something there. And as one of my friends say, you know, the shit of our lives makes the best fertilizer, right? And I don't think that God causes it to happen. I think that God is in the midst of it with us, and we're able to actually grow from that. And so when I consider my pathway to purpose, I think about the fact that God has been so present and so faithful and has made me a rose that has both grown from concrete and has been able to explore the gifts that I've been given to be of service to others in a variety of ways. So, and then I'm going to open it up for questions and conversation.
Absolutely.
Like, how much time?
It is 6:07, so we have like a couple closing announcements, so maybe like 10 minutes of questions.
Okay. So I'm actually much better at answering questions than I am at presenting. I'd love to hear questions you have about purpose and yes. Yeah, you.
What would be your advice as finding that purpose in college, the first year?
Your first year in college.
Yeah,
Your first year in college, just have fun. Is that not appropriate?
no. First 2 years.
All right, well, I don't like giving advice, right? And the reason I don't like giving advice generally tends to be because everyone is different. And, but I would probably stick with the things that I stick with generally, to be present as much as possible, right? And not to just be present in places, but to be present to your emotions, to be present to your relationships, to be present in your classes, to be present in the experiences that are afforded to you, because when you're present, you can then reflect on it. So maybe the advice would be that you're documenting what you're learning from the presence that you are actually embodying. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because as you reflect on your experience, you're going to learn stuff that no one could tell you. And because you are uniquely who you are, your experiences are going to tap into something in you that won't be the same for someone else. But the only way you gain that wisdom is if you reflect on it, and if you pay attention, and if you're present. All right? Yes?
So, when you were working for the institution and you realized that you were working for something that didn't support kind of the passions that you were in and who you identify and things like that, how did you have the confidence or the know about to completely leave it and start something new and become successful in what you are today?
Well, the jury's still out. I still have my measurements of success, and I'm not quite there yet. But,
well, you're here, so that's cool.
I mean, I was terrified. And I made the decision in April of 2016. And my parents are very supportive of me, but it was also like, yeah, you're not as young as you used to be. You know, you're single, like, okay, you need some income, like, what are you doing? And I was like, all I know is that what I'm doing is like soul sucking. And so for me, it was putting myself and my health above kind of what the expectations of me were. And having both support as it relates to not only therapy, but I work with a coach, a spiritual director, close groups of friends that help me discern. So in the midst of that, it was like, okay, I'm doing this, and this is why I'm doing it. And they're like, okay, we got you. You're not in this alone. And then it was actually making some sacrifices. So I went from having crafted a life that was pretty nice to moving back in with my parents and my grandmother. And for a year, the hashtag Rose with a Z, R-O-Z-E at home, was the way that I chronicled what it meant to live among these different generations. And again, having those, every now and then, those glimpses or those thoughts of like, you're not good enough and you're not doing the right thing because the ways that you define success, I was not living into last year. But then the recognition that it's not about like what happens immediately, it's about how I'm creating a life that I want, and how I'm saying certain things matter, and then opportunities start opening as I'm present and taking advantage of that. So it was definitely a struggle, and I did not like living in my old bedroom, and that was a struggle, but here we are. There's not too much that's off that you can't ask me about. Yeah.
Through those hardships in life that you face, what coping mechanism was the best for you?
Well, legal drugs. I'm on medication, and that was huge for me because I went from not knowing what life was like, to be clear-headed, to being like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like to not be under this cloud, right? This oppressive force. And so, but that in connection with my physical well-being, and one of the things I've been struggling with in the moving back and doing all this stuff, like I totally stopped working out. And so the last couple of months has been like, okay, getting back, because that is a natural, antidepressant. It's a natural feel-good activity, yet it's a struggle. For me, it's like, I talk about the trifecta of meds, eating, and sleeping. Those are huge. Like the little things that we think don't actually matter as much, but if I miss that, or if I'm traveling so much and I'm not sleeping, or if I skip meals, like those things have the power to kind of take me off track when it comes to my emotional well-being. And then my other coping mechanism is that I just stop and have fun with my friends, right? And I refuse to feel guilty about enjoying life. Because I've just learned that life is too short. And if we are working so hard and we can't stop for a nice dinner, or we can't stop for a quick getaway, or we can't stop and just be in each other's presence, then what the hell are we doing? So for me, having fun is a big part of this journey. And I'm also a 7. Again, having fun is essential. You have to have a good time. Yeah?
Well, you said that your relationship with money has changed. And so I think you
talked a little bit about what it used to be.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering where it is now and just how you're thinking about that. I don't know if that's something you've written about or taught about or coached about, because money seems to be such a problem. And you know, a lot of us in this room are accumulating debt, and that's a reality. It's not like you choose to ignore it. So what is your...
Well, you can choose to ignore it. When you be 36 and you're struggling with the IRS and, you know, the U.S. Department of Education, you don't want to do that. Yeah, no, that's a... So I recently got a financial advisor and planner who is a really good friend of mine who just, like, is really good with money. Because it was not something that I did well, so personally from a budgeting perspective. And so for me, a big lesson has been find people that have the tools that you need to help you as you figure this out. But the other reality was that I had to actually figure out what was most important and what I needed to live, right? So, money. No, because I like my stuff. And I won't, I've gotten to a place now where I don't like shop at all. Like for a while I was doing like either Stitch Fix or, you know, the boxes that come to my house with clothes and I'm like, yay. I stopped doing that because I love to travel. So like I will drop money on a plane ticket like easily. But this notion that in order for me to live a life that I enjoy, but that's also meaningful, that there are certain sacrifices I end up making. But I've also learned those sacrifices have been worth it, right? So I said that I wanted to travel. From the time I was a child, I wanted to travel. And then I started working for the church. And those two things didn't necessarily go together in my mind. And all of a sudden, I'm traveling all over the world. And the church is paying for it. I mean, I'm not like doing like, you know, expensive trips, but like I'm doing, you know, ministry trips and engaging folks. So I'm doing work that I love. And there's something that's happening that connects with what I really want to experience. So it's been amazing to me how, again, doors and opportunities have opened the more that I focus on what my call is and the more that I have done the work that I need to do to grow and to learn. And here's the reality, money is fleeting. And while it does make some things easier, it's not the answer to everything. And debt is real. I mean, that's why we talked about success. I don't consider myself as successful as I want to be because I am in so much debt, and it's behind school. Like, my debt is all school debt. Like, I don't even have credit cards because, you know, that's just not, I live a cash life, a debit card life, but, you know, a cash life. And then it's like the question of, well, you don't have enough credit, so then you can't do these things. And I'm like, I'm trying to be responsible. You won't let me be responsible. But it's a struggle, and I think at some point you have to make a choice. You always have a choice. You always have a choice on how you will live and what sacrifices you're willing to make so that you can be both responsible and a steward of the things that you've been given, but also how you understand money to work and what are the things that matter. So if money matters to you and if money is a thing that you need to live a meaningful life, then yeah, I mean, I don't really have any, you know, get to it. And then if you, though, are someone who is asking questions about that, and this is the other struggle, I want to have money, too, because I want to give back, right? I'm able to, my financial planner did say to me the other day, you give away way too much money. And I'm like, well, I mean, I love the camp that I worked at, and I want to support this person, and I actually do help support the ACLU, and there are things that I want to do in small amounts, and that adds up. And again, I don't know what the correlation is, and I know that in non-charismatic spaces, we don't talk about this that much, but there is something mighty powerful to tithing and to giving and the way that God honors that. And I don't know how that works. I don't know, because there's many a year that my accountant will be like, I don't know how you did it. And not only did you do it, but you traveled all over the world, you were able to pay off some things, and you still are here. And so I think that is probably the biggest thing that I've learned about my relationship with money. The spirituality that's connected to it, and the way that, again, my job is to be faithful to the call and to live out the gifts that God has given me. And I think things come together, and I don't really know how. Don't look at my bank account. Like, literally, she has told me, you cannot use your debit card. This is what you have to use. Don't even look at it. Okay. One more question? Are we good? Yes, ma'am.
Working with the young population in Houston, can you
the young people that I work with are not originally from the Houston area, so they come in for a year. But living and working in Houston, I mean, I mentioned this earlier because I had coffee with a group that's going on a service trip in January. I said something that is sometimes hard for people to hear, right? Like Houston is going to be fine. We don't really need Houston or people to come and serve in Houston. And I don't mean that in a negative or disparaging way. The reality is that Houston is a place and space that has resources, that has a local kind of organization, both the volunteers organized and active in disaster. And like any other city though, we know that the most vulnerable populations get hit the hardest. And so I mentioned to a group that I was with earlier that about 60,000 folks in Houston are still displaced. And so the issue is around housing, but it's not just housing in terms of rebuilding, it's a question of zoning and what the city is going to decide to do with land that should have never been built on to begin with. And so that's some of the struggle that's happening right now in Houston is around where people live. If people were working class and were renting and didn't have renter's insurance, you know, they are some of the ones who are struggling the most. A lot of our immigrant population in Houston that is not documented is struggling. And the city itself, I had mentioned before, we are officially not a sanctuary city, but we are a city that is very open and welcoming, and both the mayor and the police chief have made it very clear that your documentation status holds no bearing on whether or not the city will help you. That is different though from the federal government's perspective. So a lot of local organizations are working with communities that are more vulnerable, right, to provide resources and support in the midst of this particular disaster. And then the reality is that there has been disaster after disaster after disaster. So even our governmental agencies, I mean, FEMA is stretched so thin right now, and I mentioned to some folks before, I'm also Puerto Rican and have a lot of family still in Puerto Rico, and a part of me sometimes I'm like, we don't need to talk about Houston, like can we talk about like Puerto Rico or some other places that just the infrastructure has been decimated. And we as a country, I mean, I think individuals for sure, and you know, people are trying to step up, but we need government aid and support in that particular place on that island as people figure out what life looks like. Because kids are still not in, I have cousins that are still not in school, and they are on the same school calendar that we are. And they won't be. So now it's like, okay, how do we get the family here? And the family doesn't want, like no one wants to leave their home, right? And then you have survivor's guilt if you do leave, and so there are all of these issues that, you know, I say Houston will be okay. Like we are a city that has problems, that actually has a huge homeless population that was there before Harvey, and people didn't seem to be as worried about that. But, you know, there are things that I think locally each of us can do in our own communities as it relates to dealing with and supporting marginalized folks and those experiencing injustice. But I think right now, yeah, there are just so many disasters all over, and it's a struggle.
Everyone join me in a round of applause for